Well, after seeing those stories, you maybe understand why I'm doing this on video and not live. You know, on Wednesday when we recorded these stories, by the end of the day, I had one of those headaches. Like I feel like I've been crying all day. I just find them very touching. All 6 of these stories just really have touched me, and I'm sure they've touched you as well. I guess I would ask this. What is your life going to be remembered for? You know, when you're lying in a casket or in an urn and you're up at the front of the church and the preacher is up there talking about your life and what you stood for, is he going to be able to tell the truth? Or is he going to have to use generalities like, you know, never met a stranger, give anybody a shirt off their back, never said a cross word? I mean, come on. You know, you can't fake or make up a legacy. I really believe that our legacies are built upon our faithfulness to the vine. You know, when we look at these stories, Gladys and Roy and Eula, they stand for long-term faithfulness. People that lived well, you know, long in life and remained faithful through all the stages of life, including, you know, being very old. And there are struggles at the end, and it is so good. And every single one of these people, I really do miss them, and the church misses their example. Jim and Tommy and my Aunt Marge, they represent people who have been faithful to God under different circumstances, and that is who died early. And you know, in the case of Jim and my Aunt Marge, they knew they were going to die early. I think Tommy probably really didn't. But despite that, they remained faithful to God no matter what the circumstances were. And when I think about the diseases that are out there right now, I'm glad to have this example. And I think each one of us should pray that if we ever, you know, were to come up with some sort of a sickness, that we would be as faithful as these people were. And it is very encouraging to me to see how even the very illness that eventually killed them, how that strengthened their faith rather than tearing them apart. Where does my sister Cindy fit in here? It's hard. I guess where my sister fits in is there are some things in life that nobody can explain. And nobody in my family, I think, can figure this one out. And I got grandparents that are 90 years old, and they can't figure it out. And yes, we can see some good that God has brought about by this, you know, horrible accident, but most of the good that we see by faith. We just have to trust God, that God says, I can bring good from anything. And it's hard to see, even now, 42 years later, but we just have to believe God, and we accept that by faith. And so in all of these cases, they show us different ways of hanging on to our faith. Legacy is that faithfulness to the vine. It is that decisions that we make. Are we going to disconnect from the vine, or are we not going to disconnect? Are we going to stay attached to that which actually gives us life and sustenance, or are we going to tell it goodbye? That's where legacy comes from. You know, the funny thing about these stories is, you know, my grandparents don't know you. None of you knew my sister. You know, my Aunt Marge didn't know Roy and Eula. Jim Bruff, many of you don't know Jim Bruff, and there's many of you here that he didn't know. And on the stories go. I've never known Tommy, and Tommy didn't know me. But really, it doesn't matter. The only thing that really gives me pain is to think that each year that goes by, more and more people won't know Gladys, and for that pains me. But in many ways, it doesn't matter, because all of our faith stories, they intertwine, and they intertwine because we're all connected to the same vine, this same vine that is Jesus Christ, that runs over the entire world, that is filling the kingdom of God. We're all attached to that same vine. So the faith stories of somebody in Abilene, Texas, and somebody else in Saskatchewan, Canada, and somebody else in South Carolina, those stories are intertwined and they relate to each other. And we're all able to reach from one to the other and use the lessons that we learn from people. And that's one of the real beautiful things about the vine. God is calling you to be a part of this vine. He wants to sustain you. He wants to nourish you and to feed you and to pump life into you. This vine this is the way, the truth, and the life. There is no other source of life besides Jesus Christ. And what God calls us to is He calls us to give up our meaningless pursuit of pleasure. And instead, He gives us the ability to attach ourselves to the meaning that is His. He says to us, I will take your guilt and your shame on my own shoulders. And in its place, I will give you love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. God says, I will take from you your life that is winding down, and I will give you never-ending life. And in all the stories that we have seen today, different people give us different glimpses. I really believe that if you look into the lives of the people we have talked about today, and the countless other people that I could have included in this video, that you get a glimpse of eternity. In each person, God shows a different glimpse of eternity, of what never-ending life is going to be like. And just for instance, like you take the life of Gladys Whitaker, and by the end, her life was absolutely winding down. She was uncomfortable. She didn't whine or complain, but she was uncomfortable. And one day when Alan and Carolyn were out of town, I had the privilege of going and picking up Gladys at her house and taking her to her rehab appointment. And she didn't really want to go. She didn't like physical rehab. It hurt. And I just realized then, wow, her life is really winding down. But here's the glimpse that God gave us through Gladys, and that is her spiritual life was just beginning. It was not winding down. It wasn't winding down at all. And to the very end, she was still very spiritually active, and you could see growth in her the last days of her life. And that is God giving us a glimpse of what life is like when you stay attached to the vine. That even as the physical deteriorates, the spiritual is just beginning to really take off. And we saw that in her. And a part of this call, too, that God says to us is this. There is a day coming when there will be no more sadness. There will be no more mourning. I will wipe away every tear from your eyes, and I will give you life that is everlasting.